Hello there, and welcome to Gooner U, where there are no degrees because the learning never stops. I'm Dove, a TA here at Gooner U, and my friend Keith is our stalwart distinguished professor of Arsenal and football studies. Enter our classroom as we discuss the week's news involving Arsenal, Premier League, Champions League, and, especially this week, international football, all from the perspective of a couple of Americans. This week, the Arsenal men's senior team played no matches, while its players returned home to represent their countries. Hello, Keith.
Hello, Dove. I feel like we should point out that this was not prearranged in terms of our dress. That just happened that way.
Yeah, I have a current U.S. men's national team that I wanted to wear. My only non-Adidas jersey to date. This is a Nike, as is yours. And, you know, when it comes to international breaks, I only really have two international team jerseys. This one and my Messi Argentina jersey. So those will frequently feature during international breaks.
And by frequently, I mean, well, that's pretty much all you've got. We'll see about next summer as the World Cup is in the U.S. I may expand the wardrobe at that point although we'll see. I mean, they have to be good because we talked about this. I didn't really like the ones from 22.
Right.
So
I did like this one. This is the one with the tie-dyed, or at least tie-dye looking white and red at the bottom. I like the way this one looks. So. Yeah,
it's a decent one. I am still very much fully on the Waldos bandwagon. I miss the red and white hoops. That was it. That was the look. We'd be the only ones who do it. It looks perfect. Why? Why not? We did do vertical stripes. If you go back to 1994, everybody remembers the famous or infamous, but mostly famous, the denim washed with the stars. The stars pattern on it had this kind of a faded blue, so it was supposed to look like denim. They were one of those that they were considered ridiculous and gaudy at the time, and now they're pretty much entered into some of the greatest kits we've ever worn and are in high demand amongst any U.S. fans. But our other ones, which were technically our second kits in that World Cup, they were vertical stripes, red and white, but they were wavy.
Oh, okay.
I'll have to find a picture of it, but that was something else. Those, man, the 90s, the 90s were a time. Let me tell you that you had to be there. You just had to be there.
Yeah, so I have a little bit of follow-up before we move on to the international matches of the week. So one thing, the way my computer programmer brain works is I hear about a rule and I try and follow it to its limit. So we were talking about yellow card accumulation in the Champions League, and you were pointing out that it's after the quarterfinal matches that the yellow card accumulation resets. And so I was thinking, okay, so let's say you have, so it's 3 yellows is what turns into a red card suspension, basically.
Well, it turns into a 1-game suspension.
Right, but a suspension and not actually a red card, but a 1-game suspension, right? So what that means is if going into the second leg of the quarterfinal, you have 2 yellow cards. If you get your third during that second leg of the quarterfinal, it essentially doesn't matter. Is that correct?
No, you are suspended then for the first leg of the semifinal. If your team advances. But yeah, so that's what it is. It's the end of that game that the cards are then wiped out.
Okay.
Because remember we talked a little bit about this, I think, last time. What you're trying to avoid is a player picking up his third yellow card of the competition in the second leg of the semifinal.
Mm.
After having played at that point, I mean, you think about it, you go through the league phase, that was 8 games, plus, 2 games in the round of 16, 2 games. I mean, you're talking, you play that many games, and to pick up a third yellow isn't that unusual.
Right.
And all of a sudden, a star player is missing for the final, which...
Right.
I mean, look, yes, we want to maintain the integrity of the competition. You can say rules are rules, but look, you want your stars in the final. That's the Super Bowl, right? From a European perspective, you want the best players, and so to avoid that circumstance, the yellow cards are wiped out after the quarterfinal. So if you pick up that third one, you're out for leg 1 of the semis. But once the semis hit, everybody's at 0 again. Now, if you do pick up a red card suspension, in the course of the semifinals, well, then, yeah, you're going to miss the next game because, like, come on, control yourself.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Thank you for clarifying. So let's begin our international tour with Asia, the AFC, the Asian Confederation.
Yeah. So we talked a little about this before, or last week, where with UEFA having started qualification, all six continental federations have begun qualification for the World Cup. But only 5 of them were actually doing World Cup qualification stuff this break. So almost there. But we'll start in Asia, which makes sense. Japan ran out 2-0 winners over Bahrain, a pair of goals in the second half, which means, combined with other results, Japan becomes the first nation to actually qualify for the 2026 World Cup. So,
wow, nice.
Welcome to Samurai Blue. I should say, the first team to qualify outside of the co-hosts, the USA, right, Mexico, and Canada. So welcome, right, Samurai Blue.
To qualify on merits.
Yes. And they will play. They will also play Saudi Arabia, and then have 2 games following. So they've qualified. They're basically done in terms of qualification. Yes, they have 3 more games to play, but they're in. They have nothing after these 2 games. The next ones. I don't know if there's I don't think there's an Asian Cup between now. There shouldn't be an Asian Cup between now and then. So yeah, the next games that really matter for them are going to be next summer's World Cup. So
cool.
Got a little more than a year to think about that.
Yeah,
and get ready.
All right, heading over to Africa with the CAF.
So we'll start with Egypt. The Egyptians beat Ethiopia 2-0. It's not a surprise. The game isn't even in Ethiopia, which is unable to host games because, well, you can guess. According to the report I'm reading, 300 people were there in Casablanca, Morocco, to see the game, which must be an undercount. I'm sure there were more than that. But anyway, Egypt wins. They have the second game of this window tomorrow. We're recording this on a Monday. So tomorrow, March 25th, they will face Sierra Leone in Cairo. If I'm doing the math right, I don't know that they have 3 games. They have 4 games left after this window. They cannot qualify this window, but another win would put them in pretty good shape to qualify in the September window when qualification resumes. So Egypt is in pretty good shape, which on the one hand isn't a surprise. They're one of the strongest teams in Africa. You add in players like Mo Salah, oh my gosh, I can't think of his name. He was just signed by Manchester City. We saw him a couple weeks ago.
I was going to say Mohamed El Neni, but that's not who you're talking about.
No, that was our guy. I can't remember. Yeah. Young guy, just completely blanking at the absolute wrong moment. Anyway, on the one hand, yeah, Egypt is very talented. It's not a surprise. On the other hand, as we've sort of talked about it, they're a team that had Omar Marmoush. I looked it up. That was Omar Marmoush. Okay. But they're a team that has fallen in late stages of African qualifying in the past. So, it'll be good for them to finish off. Obviously, it helps a lot that Africa, I think, is the continent that's going to benefit the most from this. Their qualification process really, their number of qualified teams was relatively low for some of the quality they could bring in terms of players. And so you'd see some really high quality sides and not make it out of Africa. And Egypt was a frequent victim of that because of their qualifying system. So, well, I'm not going to congratulate the Pharaohs just yet, but they seem to be in good shape to make it.
Yeah. Okay.
Other side of the continent, South Africa, 2-0 winners against Lesotho. Or Lesotho. I don't know how you pronounce that one, actually.
I was just looking that up because I was curious. And so apparently Lesotho seems to be the UK pronunciation, while the US is Lesotho. So.
All right. Well, I guess in this shirt, I can't really do any difference. So Lesotho it is. But either way, South Africa wins. They are on 10 points. They're on top of their group at the time being through 5 games. They have 5 games remaining halfway through. So they're at Benin, or rather playing Benin as the away leg against, or they'll be in the Ivory Coast for that one. So South Africa certainly doing well, in good shape. We've mentioned in this group, there's Nigeria lurking in 4th. Nigeria is one who's traditionally made their way into the World Cup, and so that they're in a dangerous position, but only 4 points back with 5 to play, so they're hardly out of this at this stage.
All right. So how's it going south of our border in CONMEBOL?
Go down to South America. Let's see. First, Colombia, a 2-1 loss at Brazil. Vinny Jr. of Real Madrid. We'll hear about him soon enough. Scored in the I'm just reading the report here. The 99th minute. So extensive amount of stoppage time. Luis Diaz of Liverpool scored Colombia's goal. It was Barcelona's Rafinha who scored the first penalty back in the 6th minute. So, but Colombia loses to Brazil. That, by the way, if you're Colombia, that is now 3 losses in a row and 4 of your last 5 in qualifying, which is not great. The only win in that stretch was home to Chile, and Chile's not very good. So that's not a position the Colombians want to be in. They will host Paraguay tomorrow. Currently, the Colombians are sitting in 6th. Remember, the top 6 teams qualify directly for the World Cup. So still in a qualification spot, but they're 9 points behind the leaders. Luckily, they're 6 points ahead of Bolivia, who's in 7th. So I think they can feel pretty good, but a really interesting game. Paraguay is a point ahead of them in 5th. So
this is a really key match for them, yeah.
This will be a really interesting one coming up tomorrow, our time. Also back on the other country, we're looking at Argentina, the defending champions. 1-0 winners at Uruguay. Uruguay is one of the teams up near the top, so a good win for Argentina. Currently sitting on top of the table at 28 points. They have at least clinched to finish in the top 7.
Okay.
Now that's not a huge surprise at this point, obviously. So technically, they're guaranteed at least a spot in the Interconfederation playoffs. They're the only South American team that has clinched anything at this point. But they are also they're on 28 points. Bolivia is 13. So with 5 games to play, they are at 15. Now they will play at home against Brazil in the next game, that being tomorrow. So that's a fun one. Always a fun one. When Argentina and Brazil get together. I think, if I'm doing the math right on this, a win would actually clinch Argentina's spot in the World Cup finals. So they are on the cusp of making their way, of coming back to the World Cup and defending their crown. And if not this window, almost certainly will happen in the June window before qualifying finishes in September.
All right. And how's it going over in Oceania?
Well, it's finished. So for our sides, you were following Tahiti, who opened the semifinal round of qualification by losing 3-0 to New Caledonia. That didn't go so well. So they were eliminated. So fare thee well, Tahiti. And then Fiji, who I was following, played the host New Zealand in the other game and lost 7-0. Hat trick by Nottingham Forest man Chris Wood. 7-0 to New Zealand. And then earlier this morning, and by earlier this morning, I mean really more late Sunday night, our time, I think, New Zealand beat New Caledonia 3-0, which means the Kiwis join Japan as having qualified for the World Cup. So congratulations to New Zealand on grabbing the next of those spots. 48 total spots on the World Cup. 5 have been taken. So I guess that's 43 to go, which is very impressive. A lot of math for me to do very quickly in my head.
It seems to me fairly unlikely that New Zealand would ever not qualify.
Well, so remember, this is the first World Cup where Oceania actually gets automatic qualification.
Right.
Previously, their champion wound up in the Interconfederation playoffs, and that was always a pretty big hill to climb. Now, New Zealand did go, I want to say it was 2010, and Australia had done so a couple of times, most recently 2006. After 2006 is when they moved from Oceania to Asia. Mm-hmm. Yes, New Zealand is the heavy favorite to come out of Oceania, but they have been beaten at some levels of the competition before. So what I really actually want to talk about here is just thinking about the amount of games that are being played here. Take Japan, just qualified for the World Cup. They just played their 12th game of World Cup qualifying. It should have been 13 because they had the game against North Korea canceled. The North Koreans pulled out. They still have 3 more to go. So if they had played through all of qualification, they'd play 16 games as part of World Cup qualification before the actual World Cup itself.
Right.
We talked about the South Americans. They're going to play 18 games qualifying against one another. Fiji and Tahiti were just eliminated from the World Cup, each having played 4 games.
Right.
And we look at Fiji. I'll just take Fiji for an example. Fiji lost 1 game in qualifying. They had a win, 2 draws, and a loss. And they're out. Now, because of the way qualifying is structured. But we can think about, why do you think it is? I'll throw this to you. Why do you think it is New Zealand is the heavy favorite to qualify out of Oceania?
It just seems size. It's kind of like, to me, it goes back to like high school sports. Like the biggest schools have the most players, and just as a percentage, are going to have the greatest number of skilled players. It just, the numbers work in their favor, I'm guessing.
Yeah, there are limits to that thinking. As we saw India, for example, the most populous nation in the world, really not very good at the sport. Right. China has qualified for like 1, maybe 2 I can think of 1, maybe a second World Cup in their history. Yeah. Even the United States, a fairly large country, and certainly doesn't. And so population helps, of course, but also it's also that level of financial infrastructure. New Zealand is a fairly advanced economy, whereas you look at countries like Fiji, Tahiti, we talked about American Samoa, and countries like that, they're so small, they have such limited resources. And so, like, for Fiji, this is some of the few games they've even played over the last 4 years. Whereas Japan, a modern, wealthy, industrialized nation with a pretty solid culture in the sport, is rolling out there playing 14 games. So, there's that element of practice they get, or in some cases they don't get. So you get to teams at the bottom level. Fiji's next competitive game is probably not going to be or Tahiti. Their next competitive game is probably not going to be till the OFC Nations Cup, their regional championship, which might not even be, which I have no idea when that is. And they have trouble staging it. They had it in June of 2024. The next one will be in 2028. At least that's the next one is scheduled. So, yeah, that's tough. When you look at the games, right, it's tough to really sort of improve in some ways.
That's interesting. Yeah. So why do you think, or maybe this was reported on at the time, but why did they change the qualification structure then for Oceania?
Well, excuse me, part of the qualification structure is changing because the World Cup is changing, which is why you're seeing a lot of the changes we mentioned in Asia and Africa. Because there's more spots in the World Cup and more spots being given to Asia and Africa, especially. Okay. And North America. Now, North America is weird. CONCACAF is weird because, of course, our top 3, we have 3 spots going right to the co-hosts. Now, I feel pretty good about the U.S., Canada, and Mexico all qualifying for the World Cup, in a normal cycle. But at this point, I think the CONCACAF is going to get 5 or 6 spots in a 48-team World Cup, which, the last time the U.S. wasn't one of the top 6 teams in CONCACAF may have been 70s when we didn't even have a national team, right. Which is only slightly exaggerated. But it's just, it's some of it's a numbers, just a numbers game. Oceania's qualification isn't changing a lot because it used to be their best team went to the Interconfederation playoffs. Now they just go directly to the World Cup, and the runner-up there, so New Caledonia, will play somebody else in the playoffs. I don't feel very good about their chances, to be honest. Yeah. But hey, you know what? They got a shot. So, but yeah, again, a lot of it is infrastructure. These aren't very wealthy nations. The facilities aren't particularly great. I talked about whether or not they hold the OFC Cup. They've had some difficulties with it over the years. COVID obviously hurt them a lot. These small islands and their policies obviously playing a lot into how they approach things like international sports or international travel. Mm-hmm. So it's just, to the money it takes to put on some of these competitions is just limited in a lot of ways. So yeah, it's hard to stage those kinds of games, and nobody wants to play, in college sports, you would do what they call the money games, where, a small school agrees to go play an away game to a big school, take their beating and get a check for it. which funds a lot of their programs. But none of the big countries that could afford it, that could actually make a lot of money on a game, none of them want to play Fiji.
Right.
They with so many limited opportunities for games, you want to match up against teams that are comparable to or better than you, so you can test yourself.
Okay. So yeah, that's all good to keep in mind as we move forward through it. So now let's talk about UEFA's entree into World Cup qualification for this time around.
Yeah. So quickly, remember we were missing a couple of spots in the groups. They were taken, but we didn't know quite who they were based on the results coming out of the quarterfinal round of the UEFA, or maybe it was the round of 16. Either way, coming out of the UEFA Nations League. I'll be honest, I don't 100% know how those games played out, so I can't tell which was the winner and loser of it. But as a result of those games, hold on, I was just looking at it. Denmark makes their way into Group C, where they will join Greece, Scotland, and Belarus. So those games will pick up in September. Italy, as their result, will go to Group I, as they join Norway, Israel, Estonia, and Moldova.
Okay.
So that's part of ours. And we took two teams from UEFA because, like the World Cup, we just take more Europeans, it seems. It's fine. We'll start with Norway in Group I. They did start qualification, running out 5-0 winners at Moldova. 5 goals, 5 different Norwegians scored. Which is a nice thing. We mentioned Erling Haaland got one of them. Another one, Julian Ryerson, who plays for Borussia Dortmund. Is a guy from Luton scored. Alexander Sorloth plays for Atletico Madrid. And then another one, Aaron Dunham, I think it's how you pronounce it, plays for Toulouse in France. So, as we talked about, there is some talent in Norway, but you would think with Martin Odegaard and Erling Haaland, this team would be a lot better than they are. But you know what? 3 points plus 5 on goal difference is a good way to start qualification in that group.
Yeah.
They will play at Israel, or rather, they will play Israel in Hungary. Again, Israel not hosting internationals. They will play them again tomorrow when we're recording this on Monday.
All right.
In fact, they will, and then Italy will open their World Cup qualifying in June in Oslo against the Norwegians. So we'll get to see the Azzurri coming up pretty quickly. The other team we're following, or I'm following, my selection at least, was the Czech Republic in Group L, which is the last one.
Right.
Up to Group
L for last.
They opened qualifying with a 2-1 win over the Faroe Islands. Patrick Schick, who plays for Bayer Leverkusen, got 2 goals for the Czechs, including a late one to break a 1-1 tie. Not great, I suppose, that you needed all 90 minutes to beat the Faroe Islands. But as we said, a win plus 1 on goal difference, technically second in the group behind Montenegro. Also in the group are Croatia, who joins from the Nations League, and then also Gibraltar, who, by the way, Gibraltar will be hosting the Czech Republic in their second game of the window, that being tomorrow. That game not being in Gibraltar, but at the Estadio Algarve in Portugal.
Oh, okay. Cool. So then what else happened in the Nations League?
A couple of quick Arsenal notes in the Nations League. We have some good news and we have some bad news. So the good news, Miles Lewis-Skelly got a debut for England, and then he scored a goal.
Wow. Man, that's...
Yeah, so I tell you what, the kid is having the year of his life, let me tell you. It's got to feel good. Congrats to MLS. See a lot of positive things said about him by England manager Thomas Tuchel in the aftermath. This was part of World Cup qualifying. England open against Albania. They got the win. But good job for MLS.
Okay.
So what a year for young Mr. Lewis-Skelly. For Arsenal's other young gun, another Haaland lad, Ethan Nwaneri, was called up for the England U21s. Did not score in their 5-3 loss to France. But he's there. He's part of the picture. I think I'm not surprised. He's probably a little too young, for a senior team call up. So I'm okay. I'm not upset about this. especially because that was the good news. We also have the bad news. Riccardo Calafiori, playing for Italy, came off injured. Was returned to Arsenal. I have not heard anything else since. Well, that stinks. That's just kind of the way this year has gone, hasn't it, for Arsenal?
Let me ask you something. Is it just me, or does it seem like our players are getting injured more often playing for their national teams than playing for their clubs?
I don't think that's accurate. I think it just feels that way.
Yeah.
When they get hurt for the international state, it feels bad because like they're not playing like it. Because I mean, remember we lost Mikel Merino for a couple of weeks because he hurt his shoulder crashing into Gabriel in practice. We've lost plenty of players in those settings or to game injuries. You saw Saka in 1 year he came off with, and Jesus. Those were all Havertz. Those were game injuries.
Okay. Yeah.
So I mean, there is an argument to be made, and there's plenty of comments about this that, in a sense, there may be too many games. That you're by playing so much, these guys are more likely to wind up injured. But some of them, I mean, Martin Odegaard's he got a guy slide tackle, he had a slide tackle into his ankle. Like what are you supposed to do with that? So it does feel like that, but it kind of feels weird just because they're not playing for Arsenal, and so like this is what everyone's afraid of, that they go off for the internationals, they get hurt, and then they can't play for us. But again, a lot of this depends on what you bring to the table as far as watching the internationals. I mean, I told you that's how I got into the game. I am a proud fan of my national team, and I can certainly appreciate the desire to play for one's national team. Like I get it, and if I want those guys to come and play for the U.S. and I want Christian Pulisic and Tyler Adams and these guys to come play for the U.S., I can't really be mad that guys want to play for England, guys want to play for Italy, guys want to play for Spain, or they want to play for other countries that or Odegaard wants to go play for Norway. It isn't just about I'm playing for this team because I have a chance to win the World Cup. I'm playing for my national team because it means something to me.
Right.
I can appreciate and respect that. And as some of the players themselves have pointed out, like we get hurt in training all the time. Like I don't think there's really more injuries. At least not outside of the context of the small sample size. And the truth is, these kind of injuries affect everybody. It happens to other teams too. We just don't notice it as much because we only pay attention to Arsenal.
All right. Yeah. No, that all makes sense. In the context of other team sports in the Olympics, is there any other model? Like, so the model I'm talking about for soccer is you play for your club all year long, and then you get called up at some irregular interval to play for your national team. For other team sports, and obviously from a lot of the individual sports, I mean, the Olympics is really the main thing that matters. Nobody else cares about anything else. But for other team sports, like if we're just talking about even like the American ones, like hockey and baseball, let's say, right? Or maybe more obscure ones, maybe something like cricket or rugby or something that we're not not as informed about on the show. But is there any other model like where they maybe play primarily for their national team and practice with their national team, and that is their main gig? Like for some reason, it occurs to me that the women's national team in the U.S. may be closer to that.
No, they're all especially the Americans. They're all professionals. We have, the NWSL, the women's league in the U.S. is a fairly strong one, made so large part by the fact that obviously this is the U.S. and we've poured a lot of resources into women's soccer over the years. But a lot of the leagues in Europe, certainly the top teams of those leagues, are full of players who compete at the European Championships, the World Cups, and even American players. So, I mean, Real Madrid, and so it's the names you've heard of: Real Madrid, Barcelona, Olympique Lyon, Bayern Munich, Arsenal, Chelsea, Manchester City. I mean, it's a lot of the same names. A lot of it's money that they sink into there, but it's money that also goes into the players and the salaries they make. And there's good money. There is decent money to be made. Now that is a relatively recent development. Leading up to this, there was a lot more in the way of you spend a lot more time with the national team because that was as big as you could potentially get. And the women, I believe, have more international breaks. They do play more international games. Other sports, other sports that Americans we'll say this Americans care more about. Let's be frank about this. Generally speaking, our participation in a lot of international competition is minimal outside of the Olympics. So just to take I'm not going to count American football because yes, there are other countries that play American football. Yes, there is international competition, but they are so far behind Americans. It's just not even worth it. To the extent we have international competitions in baseball, like the Pan American Games, there isn't a lot. There's the World Baseball Classic, which picked up about 2006, I think, is when they started. They've had a few editions, and it's basically run by Major League Baseball and played during spring training. So it has the imprimatur of the league as part of growing the game internationally, and it's played during a relative dead space in the Major League's calendar. International basketball. Basketball is a huge sport around much of the rest of the world. It is actually it has a pretty wide probably the widest international following outside of soccer, at least in terms of team sports that Americans follow a great deal. Mm-hmm. They have a World Cup, but usually the World Cup is during the summer, so off season from the NBA, and tends to draw kind of second tier NBA players. It's the Olympics where you see the Olympics are the more prestigious competition where you will see the biggest NBA stars go, but the NBA is also increasingly international. Netflix just did a really interesting documentary about the basketball tournament at last summer's Olympics, and you can see how many of at this point the NBA's best players aren't Americans. I mean, arguably the two best players in the league right now are Nikola Jokic and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Jokic is from Serbia, and Gilgeous-Alexander is from Canada. Like those rosters are rolling out incredible talent, and the U.S. gets by a lot with guys like LeBron James, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, who are also all 40 or almost 40. So 2028 is going to be a really interesting Olympics basketball wise.
But yeah, I guess basketball would probably be the biggest other example. Like, so those guys in the NBA, they're not playing with the national team regularly. It's like when Olympic time rolls around, they'll train for a few weeks before the main competition. And that's probably it, right?
And remember, it's the Summer Olympics, which is the off season for the NBA. Right. So they ran through. So going into 2024, right? They ran through the season. The NBA Finals ended in mid-June. And then the Olympics aren't until, mid-July. So there's a month off. So they get a week or two off. You get a week or two of training, practice together, just sort of, work some things out with the coach, get a couple exhibitions, and then you're into the Olympics.
Right.
The last one comparison really would be ice hockey, at least that I know. So there is an annual World Championships, which is very big in Europe. European leagues basically finish their season by the end of April, early May, so that their guys can be ready to go and play for their national teams. The U.S. and Canada don't care. Their teams, their rosters are largely made up of players whose teams in the NHL weren't good enough to qualify for the playoffs or lost in the first round.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, now having said that, Canada's won the gold the last few years. The U.S. has medaled in the last few years. I like they're both good countries, but Canada is definitely leaving a ton of talent on the sidelines because they're in the middle of the professional championship. Same with the Americans. The only time you really see that they call the best on best is the term they use is really the Olympics. And that's when they can negotiate between the NHL, the International Olympic Committee, the International Ice Hockey Federation. All these groups have to be involved because the Winter Olympics are in the middle of February during the middle of the NHL season. They took it off 98 through 2010. And then the last couple of Olympics, 14, 18, and 22, NHL players did not go to those Olympics. They will be going, however, in 2026. So they'll stop the season for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. Which will be interesting to watch. And then you just had in about a month ago, they had what they called the Four Nations Face-Off. So NHL players who played for US, Canada, Finland, and Sweden played a small tournament, which was pretty exciting. It was a really good tournament. And so you get the sense you miss. You rarely see that kind of top players playing for their nations in hockey, unfortunately. Hopefully we get to see a little bit more of it because it is a lot of fun.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that was a cool idea. I didn't get to see any of it, but there was being advertised when I caught a Blackhawks game with my dad while we were visiting in February. So, Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to our home confederation, the only non-World Cup qualifying federation this time around. So what? I ask this largely knowing the answer. But what happened?
I have words for our performance, but I can't say them on this family-friendly podcast.
There's preschool toys present.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, it wasn't good. So the U.S. played Panama in the semifinals. Stop me if you heard this one before, but we struggled to break down a defensive low block. And then, as it turns out, Panama beat us on the counter. A goal that, if you haven't watched the highlight, you should check it out. Congrats to Panama for taking their chances, but Matt Turner's got to do better on that. Oh, the whole defense has to do better on that. I don't think Turner's particularly well positioned. He should get to the ball, but he doesn't. The defender shouldn't have let him even get a shot that's even that decent. And then, just because they twist the knife on me, the Panamanian players ran over and celebrated their goal, which was deep into stoppage time, was effectively the winner when it happened. Ran over and celebrated their goal with Thierry Henry, who was there providing commentary for CBS. And it just... so many conflicted feelings. Apparently, the Panamanian, I believe they said he was shouting at Henry, "You're my idol," which, if nothing else, is a reminder of how old you are, because I watched you when I was a kid. Oh, God, you're an adult. So, yeah, that was not a great performance. They then followed it up with an absolute stinker in yesterday's third-place match against Canada. Probably the most interesting thing that happened was Canadian manager Jesse Marsh got himself ejected for arguing against what he thought was a penalty, was very clearly not a penalty. He then ran onto the field in terms of his protestations, and surprise, surprise, got a red card for that. You can't do that. Immediately after that, Canada scored the go-ahead goal and ended up winning 2-1. It was just it was an ugly performance. Not good. Then later the evening, Mexico beat Panama with a penalty deep in stoppage time, because of course Mexico got a penalty deep in stoppage time when they needed one. Of course they did. Bitterness aside about continental rivals, we stunk. This was unacceptably poor. Not a lot of people can come out. Not a lot of players can come out of this feeling good about themselves. And there was a lot of talk with the U.S. about, Greg Berhalter and how limited things were under him and how they'd got rid of him. And look, I think it was his time to go. Performance in the Copa America wasn't good enough. But Pochettino should be a little bit, there should be a little warmth under his seat for that. For us to not just lose, but look completely outclassed in CONCACAF competition is not okay. Yes, we're going to have the Gold Cup this summer, but we are going to be missing a couple of key players because of the Club World Cup going on at the same time. Mm-hmm. We should expect a better performance, frankly, and that was not okay, especially given, the Gold Cup this summer. That's, in terms of serious competition, that's it before the World Cup in 2026, because we don't get qualification.
Right.
We do have a couple friendlies before the Gold Cup kicks off against Turkey and Switzerland, which are pretty good competition. Hopefully we can see something a little better there. But yeah, the frustrating thing is just to watch them and I can't tell what it is we wanted to do. I could see a lot of times what Berhalter wanted us to do, and I could argue against it, and it's not unfair at times, but I guess I walked away from those games at least knowing what we wanted to do. I don't know what, at least, and again, I didn't actually watch the Panama game live. I saw bits and pieces of it, highlights afterwards, but I did watch all the Canada game. It was not pretty, and I don't really know what we intended to do, which is not a feeling I like. Mm-hmm. When you watch the game. We've talked about this at times with Arsenal, right? The moments when you don't feel, there are times when you can say, well, we did what we wanted to do, but we just couldn't convert our chances. The idea of the process over the results. It's about playing well. We continue to play well, and we'll get our results. But when you get most frustrated with the club is when they just don't play. And when that happens, you're kind of left questioning, well, what are we trying to do here? And with the national team, it's so frustrating because they're not going to play another game for 3 months. So,
yeah, it was interesting. I caught an article in The Athletic talking about Matt Turner specifically and some of his challenges. So, for one thing, he's on the bench with his club, which isn't even his club, right? He's on loan to Crystal Palace from Forest, and he's their backup keeper. He's played like 2 or 3 matches with them, and then he gets called up, and apparently, he's done well enough for the national team. He continues to get called up. And in this match in particular, they were saying, it was one of these where he's kind of waiting for something to happen for a long, long time. And then something finally does. And he got caught in a bad position, and it was unfortunate, but it's tough, I guess. It seems to happen with our national team from what they were saying before, where we're in the similar situation of not having like a good, reliable starting keeper for their club who's our number one.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, that was for the longest time one of the strengths of the U.S. team. And some of this, it's kind of an interesting question, because you'll hear a lot of this in the commentary about the talent versus the will. Like, I think this is definitely a more talented team than we've had in the past in terms of the quality of the players. And the obvious metric is, well, these guys play at big-time European clubs. Okay, that's true. Although for a lot of reasons, it's a little bit easier for them to get to Europe professionally. I don't mean like physically. You could always just hop on an airplane and go. But to make those transfers to those European clubs, it's a little bit easier for a lot of reasons these days than it was for those guys who played 15, 20, 30 years ago. Which it's terrifying to me that really was that long ago. But, talk about the 2010 World Cup or even 2014, a decade ago. And that's true. But I do think it's fair to say these guys have gotten a lot more tactical development. They're talented in certain ways, but those older teams had a certain level of just, they had to scrape and claw for everything. Marsh has made some comments about Canada not getting respect in CONCACAF from the referees, which... Do you even CONCACAF, bro? Of course you don't get respect. Like, no, U.S. still doesn't get respect in CONCACAF. Like, come on, you know better. But there was always that sense that we had to fight and scrape and claw for everything. Because we weren't respected anywhere, but not even in the U.S. Forget internationally. And now the U.S. is a little more, sort of accepted. It's kind of expected that we'll be good. And there is a sense that the players don't have that same kind of edge. I really hate that kind of analysis because, like, I don't really know what's in somebody's head or heart. Like, I don't really know how competitive they are. I mean, these are super competitive, high-level professional athletes. So I really hate the idea of like, well, they just didn't try hard enough. Like, they're trying pretty hard there. But at the same time, it's hard not to watch them at times and just think whatever it is, that sort of extra little gear that the older version of the team, which was much more, I mean, watch them. They're much more tactically limited. That team thrived on, desperate defending and set pieces and good goalkeeping. Like, they were not always very pretty to watch. But they could produce enough moments of quality and they ground out results and, put together, laid the foundation for a very successful period of U.S. soccer. And you never really know what somebody's thinking, but at the same time, it does feel like there's something, it does feel like they don't have the same, something's different, and I don't know quite what it is or how necessarily you fix it. The line I always heard, there's a hockey analysis, but it's the same basic idea. Will beats skill if skill doesn't have will, and it doesn't feel like at times it doesn't feel like we have that will, unfortunately.
Yeah,
and I don't know why. They're talented, they're competitive, like they're good players, and it's just maybe it's tactical, maybe it's some internal cultural. I don't know, but. It's very annoying to watch. I don't like it.
Yeah.
It makes me sad.
All right. Well, one thing to talk about, a little interesting topic that we've had on our list for a couple of weeks, waiting for the right opportunity, is an article on The Athletic where they were talking about something that I actually brought up a few weeks prior, which was fake football shirts. So this was something that I brought to the show because, as I explained in that episode, I had been trying for months, where I was trying, I think at times every day and certainly once a week, to get the aqua colored Miami archive kit for Messi for my son. And I got the jersey like as soon as it was announced. I got the jersey, no problem. But then the shorts and the socks were just not available anywhere in the youth size. At least there was the adult shorts for a while, but I never saw adult socks. So after trying to get the official ones for a long time, I finally just gave up and bought fake ones that I found on some sketchy site, which turned out, as far as I'm aware, okay. They looked decent. I pointed out that the patch on the shirt was like scaled down with the shirt instead of the official one, which is pretty much the grown-up size patch, just on a smaller jersey for the kids. But the shorts look like you'd expect. The socks maybe not quite as thick and nice as like his Arsenal Adidas socks, but okay, the right colors and look passable, and they may not last as long, but nothing does for a kid. He'll outgrow them before long anyways. So this article from The Athletic was coming at this from the angle of, first of all, the stated assumption, and probably borne out by reality, which is that almost everybody else buying fake football shirts, it's the price. Like they just can't pay, they can't bring themselves to pay, and certainly not multiple times every year to pay over $100 for the official shirts for their teams. But I guess what I didn't realize, this is the biggest thing that I never even thought about, that never even crossed my mind before reading this article, was the things that are also potentially wrong with the shirt beyond just what it looks like. Maybe the materials are potentially hazardous. Like they aren't subject to the same safety standards that like Adidas as a company would subject themselves to, but then also that government bodies regulate also things such as fire resistance and rash, like skin irritation concerns and things like that.
Yeah, we do sort of forget sometimes. I mean, it's easy to complain about the expense of things, and I get it. Nobody likes paying more for stuff. But there are a lot of things that go into those costs, and supply and demand is one of them. Obviously, these shirts are in very high demand, and there's only so much supply you can produce of them. But also, there's a lot that goes into their production. These are not cheap. There's quality in them, and that that's not the kind of thing you can just like kind of put together out of nothing. So in a sense, I understand the frustration on the prices. It's partly why I don't buy shirts that often, or I will buy them secondhand. I mean, this was used off eBay. So, I can't sit here and say that I only ever buy the new stuff. I don't. This was used. A good chunk of my kits, a handful of the kits I own are used. You bought them off eBay. They come with the Nike tags on everything, so I do feel confident in their provenance and all that. But it's I know guys who buy one or two shirts or sometimes all three of them every year. That adds up a little bit, but it's a lot. That's how you budget it.
So something else that was interesting that I never even considered was, first of all, just the rampancy of it. They're talking about like streets in London where that's like all they have are these sketchy warehouses. And like, as you walk through, they'll like bring you into this really like dilapidated building with lighting not working and things like that. And if they get any wind of like a police officer walking by or something, they'll hold a knife to your throat, like until danger is passed. Like, so like potentially people's like safety in a very real way being in jeopardy. I also didn't realize just the extent to which organized crime is involved in creating and distributing these shirts. And who knows, all kinds of crimes against humanity you may be helping facilitate by giving money to these companies. So,
and it goes into a question of demand. We compared, international sports before. Listen, I love hockey. But it internationally pales in comparison to soccer. The reason these places can exist is because the demand is that big. It is enormous internationally. And so, that makes that sort of thing possible or probable. And, look, we're sitting here both wearing shirts made by Nike. Nike's hands aren't necessarily clean in terms of their labor practices. We don't have to be ignorant of that. But you're right. Even they, as their large businesses, theoretically operate under some standards. And if you complain about those, imagine you remove the standards altogether.
Well, right. Yeah.
It is an interesting thing. And then you also lead to the other bit, which is, we talked about your saga with the earlier saga with a fake Arsenal kit. I mean,
yeah.
Which, as I recall, you still never seen. Is that how that went?
No. I got that. So that was, I think, the first time I went to buy a jersey at all. It was late enough in the season that they just weren't available anymore. I had a tough time finding an official jersey just because, that's the way that it is. From what I can tell, is like if you don't pounce on them, they'll go out of stock for weeks or months at a time. Maybe as it gets to this time of year, like they stay out of stock at that point until the new jersey comes along over the summer. And so I thought that I was buying one that was legitimate. As far as I was aware, as I made the purchase, it seemed like it was. And then when it shipped, I saw that it was shipping. I think it was from China. And that seemed a little weird. And sure enough, as I started buying jerseys elsewhere, they seem to always start off in England. Like it seems like all the Premier League jerseys, all the Arsenal jerseys are actually at least distributed from there, if not actually manufactured there. Although manufacturing them there probably makes sense since that's where so many of them end up getting sold. But so, I was tracking it and it came and it seemed like everything was fine with it. But I think it didn't fit me and I ended up returning it for that reason or something. But, and I ended up finding American-based sites after that point where basically if I'm getting a current Arsenal kit for myself or my son, I'm usually going to it's run by Fanatics, but there's another site that they have that carries a lot of the soccer stuff. I'm blanking on the name. I'll put the link in the show notes, but I get them from completely reputable places. Dick's Sporting Goods I've gotten a couple from when I don't care about personalization, because if you're not buying one of the stock ones that they've personalized for you, then good luck. But so I buy from authorized, legitimate, be above board resellers, except in these exceptional circumstances where that just isn't an option, which I would probably do the same thing again. If there is no legitimate version and my son wants a certain thing or I want it for him, so one or both of those, I'll get something. I'd like to get the official one, but
that was kind of where I wanted to close this. At least I'm not necessarily finished, but so I originally sent this to you. Was The Athletic was doing a survey talking about who had purchased kits and it admitted who had purchased those kits and doing so knowingly. They knew they were purchasing a fake one, and then whether or not they would do it again. Now, their numbers, this is in the article, said 52%. And it said The Athletic surveyed nearly 300 fans across all 20 Premier League teams in person and via social media this season, and 52% admitted to knowingly purchasing one. Of those, more than 80% said they would do it again. Did you actually I sent the survey to you. Did you fill that out?
I did. Now, it was after the article that published the results of the survey, but I did see something. They're going to be doing a follow-up because now after publishing the article, that many more people are filling out the survey. Yeah. So I'll be counted amongst the people who are represented in the next round. Yeah. I think I answered yes to both of those. I was aware that I was doing it. And I mean, before reading the article, I was more likely to do it again without even really caring. Now, the safety concerns, especially I know my son was breaking out in hives just from a fully legitimate sunscreen that he happened to have a reaction to. If there's a chance of something like that just from buying some shady clothing, that may not necessarily be a good thing to do. But they were also talking toward the end about alternatives, where do we go from here? One solution that they tossed out there, and this would need buy-in from not a majority, it was some specific number of the Premier League clubs, but imposing a cap. And just from an economic standpoint, I am very, very opposed to price controls. I would never want to impose on someone else a limit for the price of something, because that's going to end up bad. If you put a price control on it, you're going to end up with black markets and shortages. That's what happens when you put a price control. People are still not going to be able to get the jerseys, and you're going to end up probably paying even more on average than you are now without the price controls, ironically, but that's the way it works out. What do you think about the other solutions that they tossed out there? Because some of them are familiar to us.
Yeah.
But so, for instance, like what they do in MLS, right, where they rotate one kit every year and leave the others, basically, or something like that, right? Would you like to see Arsenal and other Premier League clubs move in that direction?
I mean, I don't. Again, I come out of this from an American example where, the even MLS teams changing their uniforms every year, like that sort of thing is sort of slowly creeping into like the NBA and Major League Baseball. They have these city editions or city connects, which they wear a couple times a year and all of that. The NHL's done some things like that, but like by and large, granted, the Yankees are one example who are a bad one because they have two jerseys. They have their home and their away, and that's it.
And it's been that way for decades, yeah.
And they look the same. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
And a lot of these designs have stayed for the same for decades. Like they don't, or they. I mean, every year Arsenal rolls out a shirt. It's red with white sleeves, but you've seen the different ways they've sort of decorated that and the accoutrements and some of the tertiary colors. But like when I flip on the New York Giants, they wear blue with white numbers. Or they wear their away, their road shirt. Well, it's white with red numbers, and they're increasing thirds and stuff mixing in. But by and large, they really only got two looks, and they've worn that blue with white numbers for 25 years.
Right. Yeah, it's a different mentality. I mean, but I have a feeling that they're going to move in the direction of the Premier League before the Premier League would move in their direction. I mean, you see it with Major League Baseball already, with putting the sponsors on the shirt sleeve and on the batting helmets. You're starting to see some of these additional ways to make money off of the fans.
Oh, absolutely. And the other thing we'll point out, just one last thing to point out in this. I mean, soccer's been changing. To me, it's an interesting change going every year. But when I started watching it was every 2 or 3. And they've been doing that since at least the early 90s, if not sooner. Like, this is not a new thing in the sport. Because, again, what is a soccer jersey? It's a T-shirt. And you can do a lot of things design-wise with a T-shirt that you can't necessarily do with some other types of some other uniforms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, that was an interesting discussion. As far as what's coming up for next week, for us, we are going to have a Gooner U film studies episode. We haven't done that in a while. We will be watching and discussing Disney's 1995 movie, The Big Green. That's one that I've never seen before. I don't know what to expect from it. That'll be a fun discussion, continuing our family-oriented soccer movies before we move into some more serious ones in the future. So you can catch that in a week. But what is going on for the rest of the international game and for Arsenal, more importantly, over the next 2 weeks, really, because we won't be talking about it next week.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about this. We mentioned some teams have some qualifiers, still qualifying games to go in Asia, Africa, South America, and in I think actually Europe. I think our teams might be done for Europe. But we still have a handful of games to go, although potentially Argentina coming close to clinching, if not actually clinching, but otherwise we're going to see mostly jockeying for position, except for Japan, of course, who are already in. As far as Arsenal is concerned, we are back on Tuesday, April 2nd, when they're home against Fulham. So that'll be a pretty tough game to come out of the break. It is weird. The entire league actually picks up on Tuesday because the next round of the FA Cup is actually this weekend, which I had not realized, which of course I hadn't because we haven't been in the FA Cup for 2 months. Tuesday, home against Fulham, and then on the weekend, early Saturday morning, away to Everton. And then the following week, as we'll talk about, Real Madrid in the Champions League at home, first leg. That's going to be something. More on that to come.
Yeah. And it's far enough away from those matches. We can't tell you where to find them on US TV, but there will be a link in the show notes to World Soccer Talk's Arsenal US TV coverage page, which is what we always consult before passing that along to you guys. So feel free to bookmark and go there in the future.
We should point out these are both Premier League games, so they will be somewhere in the broader NBC universe of channels.
Yep. Good tip. Thanks for joining us at Gooner U. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also listen to our show on Apple, Spotify, and some other places. If you're only listening, try watching us on YouTube with a link in the show notes. Your homework for today is to smash the like button on one of our videos, or, who knows, do a bunch. We record the show using Zencaster. If you'd like to try it out, you can support Gooner U by signing up using the link in the description, which also has links to everything we talked about and our social pages. Again, my name is Dove. You can find me on Twitter at DoveFrankel. With me, as always, is Keith, and you can find him in a pub watching Arsenal matches.
And once again, congratulations, Japan and New Zealand. See you next
Miles
summer.
Lewis Skelly.
And Miles Lewis Skelly.